On this podcast, we have addressed many anti immigration arguments, but we have never endorsed any of the most conventional arguments in favor of immigration either. And that is because we have a unique perspective on the reasons why immigrants should be welcome in America. And we think that the anti immigrant arguments and the pro immigrant arguments have many of the same fundamental philosophical problems. So today we will explore what those problems are and what the right approach to thinking about the topic of immigration is. Welcome to New Idea Live, the podcast of the Ayn Rand Institute. I'm Agustina Vergara and I'm joined by Onkar Ghate. So, Onkar, part of the reason I wanted to talk about this today is because I've noticed throughout my reading and research on this topic of immigration that the arguments in favor of immigration, as well as the objections, but specifically the arguments in favor of immigration, have remained the same basically throughout all of American history, the America's history of immigration. And I started noticing some issues, philosophical issues with these arguments. And with the immigration system itself, as we have talked about many times on this podcast and elsewhere. So I found this description of what the immigration system does from an organization called the American Immigration Council. And it reads, U.S. immigration law is based on the following principles: the reunification of families, admitting immigrants with skills that are valuable to the U.S. economy, humanitarian protections, and promoting diversity. And I think that these principles align with the reasons and the arguments that conventional immigration advocates use to defend immigration and to try to promote more immigration. I think in part they use these arguments because it's technically what the immigration system is designed to do. But there are problems with both the system, that these being the principles of the system, and these being the sort of arguments that are used to try to defend immigration and to promote more immigration. So I want to take a look at some of the most conventional, most common arguments that are used in immigration in trying to defend immigration uh, today. So the issue of the family reunification. Um, so I think this argument goes something like this: that America has must welcome immigrants of the family members of U.S. citizens, U.S. permanent residents, so immigrants as well, as one of the main purposes of the system. And this argument is quite popular, and we hear it all the time. But like, for instance, there's in the statement of principles from one of the pro-immigration organization, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, reads as their second principle: secure family unit as an immigration cornerstone. A return to family-based immigration guarantees our prosperity and national cohesion. So our just a little bit of context for our audience. Our current immigration system is based on a law from 1965, the Immigration Nationality Act, that was a response to a previous law from 1924 that was extremely discriminatory. It excluded entire nationalities in favor of northern and western European people. And it created a system based on skills as defined by the government, and based on family reunification for US citizens and immigrants that were already here. And it really emphasized the family reunification. And so what happened was that this was the basis of the system that we have today. And what we have today is that family reunification is the primary driver of green cards in America. So at least 60%, sometimes a little more, of green cards go to family sponsorship. So go to the relatives of Americans and the relatives of legal permanent residents that are already here. And it is uh, the most straightforward way of coming to America legally. I'm not saying it's easy, because it's also very hard to do in that process, but it is nowadays the most straightforward way and the least um, cumbersome and problematic way to do so. So, family reunification is a strong component of our system today, and the argument that Americans should welcome immigrants based on this on family reunification is one of the narratives that are pushed the most about immigration. So, Onkar, what is the philosophical premise behind this?
You have to think about this as they're putting the emphasis on it. So I think it's helpful to have a bit of a contrast in mind. So you read from the American Immigration Council that what U.S. immigration law is based on, but you can think of that as it's based on this when the government started controlling immigration into the country. That what is the government trying to achieve? And you can think of all these as these are things the government views as legitimate. So if people want to come in, it's a reunification of families. Okay, that is will allow that as a goal or a purpose. Admitting immigrants with skills that are valuable to the US economy. It's again, okay, the government thinks that these people will be a net positive or a net value. They're going to boost the US economy. So, okay, we can allow in those people. Or there's humanitarian considerations. And again, it's from the perspective of the government thinks, well, these people need to be bailed out, they need assistance. And promoting diversity. It's, well, the government thinks, well, somehow the US would be better if we have, in quotes, a more diverse population. So this is all in the context of governments controlling immigration for some specified ends or goals. And that list is sort of these are the goals that we allow. And in that context, I think no, family reunification, all of these are not legitimate, they're not proper, and they come from bad premises. And so again, if you think of the contrast to, well, before government controlled immigration in the way that it now controls immigration, it was people as individuals could come, and it was when we say that America was built by immigrants, it means that all kinds of people came here for the freedom that America offered, and that they could build, they could work. Like that's the prime. They could work and build a life. And it's not they were coming to build up America. Like it's the nation. Or what we care is about building up some nation, and we're some subordinates or servants. They built the great nation, but precisely because they weren't focused on, yeah, what we're here to contribute to the U.S. economy. No, we were here to build a life, and a lot of people doing that together make something that the I don't think anybody anticipated from America at the time of its creation. It's not a leading power. It's a relatively, I mean, it's not backward economy, but it's not the most advanced economy in the world. So, and it's not that people said, "Oh, we're going to build the greatest economy in the world," and go. It's we're going to build our own lives, and in doing that, what happened was this became the most powerful country in the world. But if you think of that as the contrast of people, just individuals choosing to come here because they can work and build a life, and now, oh no, that's not what who sort of were holding the sign out to you're welcome. No, you're welcome if you've got some family members in the U.S. and they say you want to reunite, or we think you're going to contribute to the economy, or we think you're a basket case and something that you're suffering, and so we're providing some kind of humanitarian assistance, or we need people who don't look like us, so we're going to try to get people now not from Northern Europe but from Africa because we like all of that. Those are goals that all of them I don't think are legitimate. And there's, if you ask sort of philosophically, what are I would put the two emphases in these goals is there's an altruistic perspective, and that's the humanitarian that we have to look for the people suffering, and that's who we're going to bring in and offer some kind of sort of national government assistance to. And there's a kind of collectivism, a collectivism at a smaller level, that what we care about family, like families is what builds a nation. We want families now. I'm not against family reunification in a certain context, but of this, as this is what the goal of, or like a major goal of immigration, that's not a major goal of, and it's not it's another way to think of the collectivism is there's a social engineering here, that the government's in charge of engineering society. And so, oh, we think families are better, so we're going to that. And when you look at the statistic, it's say of green cards, it's gone way down, that people are getting them for just for employment, like I'm here to work, and way more. No, I've got it's family based. It's so that's a kind of collectivism, but it's the social engineering is government has thinks that intact families, or families often means extended family. You bring in your grandparents or parents. That's better, and we're going to decide which skills are needed by the U.S. economy, and that's a government social engineering this, and we're going to promote diversity because we say that makes us. This is all the government doing social engineering, and that's not legitimate, and it's not a good argument for immigration.
And you mentioned asylum and kind of like refugees as well. And yeah, like it's kind of like seeing immigrants in this, which is, asylum and refugees. The refugee program is seen as like one of the main drivers of immigration. Like we need to help these people that are suffering across the world, and we need to do this charity to them and bring them here. And that is the one, like trying to appeal to that sort of like altruism in people is, I think, one of the main arguments that are given in favor of immigration. Like for instance, the immigration principles from the National Immigration Forum state, as number one, show compassion and justice to long-time residents, including dreamers, by allowing them an opportunity to earn lawful status and citizenship. Okay. And number two, continue America's moral leadership in the world as a welcoming and compassionate nation that offers refuge to the persecuted. So there's a lot of advocacy in trying to expand asylum and expand refugee programs. And I see, from what I've seen, there's like a lot of focus on trying to do this, and in like expanding family sponsorship for immigrants. And I don't see from advocates the same, let's say, passion and emphasis on trying to expand work programs. They are usually, the way that I see it argued is like, okay, we have illegal immigrants already here. Okay, let's give them a work permit. Like I see a lot of that, especially since last year when we saw in New York City all these immigrants that were at the hotel and were receiving welfare, and there was a strong push. Okay, let's let them work because they get here and they are not allowed to work legally, and that's obviously a problem. But I see some advocacy, obviously, of that, but I don't see as much as like, let's expand work programs, or let's expand work visas so they can come here actually to work. Again, there's some advocacy of that, and there's people doing great job on that area, but it's not one of the main drivers of the pro immigration arguments, I don't think.
And particularly if you think of work in the broad way it should be thought of. So it's one thing to have refugees and asylum seekers, and then what compassion here means, it means government compassion. It's we're gonna put them up, house them, and then there's a kind of begrudging. Oh well, yeah, maybe they should. And what they find too is many of these people, like, I don't want to be put up. I want to work. Why won't you let me work? But they think of compassion as, oh no, if you put them on some kind of government assistance and program, that's what compassion looks like. Compassion doesn't consist of, oh, you want to work? Yeah, then why don't we make it easy for you to work? So there's a kind of begrudging aspect to it. And then if you so that there's a broad sense of what it means that people want to come here and work. It's not just, it certainly includes people who are persecuted in their home countries, and it includes people who are low skilled, but includes the highly skilled. So if you, I mean, so many tech companies and sort of, it's not just tech. I mean, in medicine, all kinds of areas where companies require workers with high skills, high education. They want significant increases in the visa numbers so they can bring in highly skilled workers and highly educated. They're needed to, if they want their companies to grow, to prosper, to be profitable, they want to hire these people. And who pushes for that? That, oh yeah, our immigration laws should make that, should be, those numbers should be way increased. This is really important. And who, and then if you ask, uh, who pushes for that, and who thinks of that in moral terms, that there's something good about these people and having them, that they're free to come to America and that companies can hire them. There's something good about that, that there's something moral about that, these people, both that the companies want to hire highly skilled, highly educated, productive people, and that these people want to come to America but are being prevented by the immigration system. Like that, who thinks of that as in moral terms, and that it's an evil committed by the immigration system. And if you don't think of it in those terms, I think you're not thinking about immigration in the right way.
I agree with that, Onkar. And I also note there that this classification that the immigration system itself has of skilled and not skilled is what the government considers to be skilled and not skilled. And it's frankly arbitrary. A lot, and there's like, in fact, it's a way, I think, also in to kind of like control labor and the sort of works that are performed here in America. Um, so I think that classification is also very, very, very suspicious. It's just arbitrary, essentially, because someone coming here, like, and there's no way, in fact, like this classification, part of what it does is there is basically no way for like low skilled immigrants, as they're called, to come here legally. And that's why you see like a lot of people coming, like crossing the border, that end up doing those sorts of jobs, or they may actually be have more skills, but they're not allowed to come. Uh, but it's not the it's not a category of work that government considers to be valuable enough to have more people doing. And it's this control. I think it's basically control of labor, essentially. Um, so back to the asylum and refugee programs is I think this has this sort of view that America is kind of like, I think it's referred sometimes to as the asylum of the oppressed. It's thought about in like quite collectivistic terms, and thought about, okay, the reason to welcome asylum seekers and refugees is because they are suffering. The mere fact that they suffer is what makes it a moral decision to welcome them. Um, and I was thinking, when I was thinking about this issue, about the poem in the Statue of Liberty, and how that poem is usually, I think there's this conventional way of thinking about this poem, like in these kind of like altruistic, collectivistic terms. And because, the poem says, "Give me your tire, you're poor, you had a masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore." And I think that the interpretation is, oh, because they are tired, because they are poor, we have this moral duty as Americans to welcome these people. So, what do you think of that view?
Yeah, I think it's a misinterpretation of what the Statue of Liberty means and stands for. So there is something to its "give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses." But you have to, it's yearning to breathe free. So it's not the fact that they're tired, poor, huddled masses. It's the fact that they want to breathe free. And it's often, I mean, this was the new world, and the new world beckoning people from around the world that American ideals are better than the ideals, or, I mean, pseudo ideals that you have at home. So it's true that coming to America, they were tired, they were poor, they were treated like masses in their home countries, often persecuted, but sometimes just denied. Like, you're the underclass. We exploit you. We treat you like a class. Like, so that's what masses in part conveys. And what you can do in America is break free from that. You no longer have to be tired. You no longer have to be poor. You no longer have to be view yourself as like I'm part of some class or mass. I'm an individual, and I can now live in America. That's what yearning to breathe free. So it's, if you want to break out of this, America welcomes you. We don't welcome you because you're tired or you're poor or you're classified in some collective. It's precisely if you want to get out of that and so this, but it's part of what in the Declaration that all men are created equal. It's blasting the notion that, oh yeah, like some people can live in freedom and can make use of freedom, but so many individuals, no, they're too stupid, or unproductive, that of course they'll just make a mess of freedom. And the American perspective was that's completely wrong. They only look incompetent, stupid because they've been held down by their culture and by their government. And if they are able to live in freedom, you'll see that they're able to live and they can stand on their own 2 feet. That's what the Declaration means. That's what the Statute of Liberty means. That's who it's beckoning. And so it's not an altruist perspective of give us your poor and we'll look after them. No, that's not
Yeah,
at all, I think, what it means.
yeah, it's more what I think actually is what is the case. What, like, just bringing letting people come here to stop, like, to search for a better life, in terms of get that weight of government and of oppression off them, and just I don't think immigrants need the government needs to be helping immigrants. Immigrants just need to be to help themselves, to be allowed to help themselves, which is not always the case. And including with asylum seekers, when there are asylum seekers that enter, for example, through the southern border, they're not allowed to work, and they sometimes become dependent on welfare and programs, by the welfare programs, because they're not allowed to work, and they really can't help themselves. And that's exactly, I think, what's needed. Then another issue that you mentioned, it's also one of these principles that the immigration system is uh, kind of like founded on, and also one of the main arguments made in favor of immigration is the argument, like, from the diversity. And for example, we have on Nancy Pelosi's website, she says, and I quote, "These new Americans affirm our country's fundamental and founding truth, that in diversity lies strength." And it's a very common phrase like, I have encountered many ways, many times, this phrase that says, "America diversity is America's strength." It's one of the main things that make us American. And in fact, the immigration system reflects this through a couple, in several ways, but two of the main ones are this diversity visa program that was started, I think, in 1990, beginning of the 90s, where it's a program that consists in trying to get as many people from as many different countries here as possible. So, like, if you are a person from if you want to immigrate to America, you enter on a literal lottery that awards legal permanent residency, so like a green card, to people from countries that have sent fewer than 50,000 immigrants to the United States in the previous 5 years. So essentially, if you are from a country that doesn't have many immigrants here in the US, you are allowed to enter and you have chances of becoming a permanent legal resident, a green card holder, based solely on the fact that you were born in a country that is not, that doesn't have many, has not sent many immigrants to America. And then there's another way in which the immigration system promotes diversity, which is the country quotas, meaning that no more than 7% of the total green cards that are awarded in a given year can go to one specific country. So if you have, so that's what creates, our audience may have heard about backlogs in providing green cards. It means that countries that have a lot of people trying to come here are going to have a lot of people. The wait list, if you're from one of those countries to come to America, is going to be really high, because you, that country, say India for instance, can only get 7% of the total green cards that are available in a year. So clearly our immigration system, and a lot of people that advocate for immigration have diversity as this value, as it was kind of like intrinsically good. The fact that you are from a country that we have never, that we haven't really seen a lot of, that is what should award you something as precious as a green card, a permanent resident in the United States, which is extremely hard to obtain for the vast majority of people. So what do you make of this particular issue, Onkar?
It's tragic and perverse. It's part of what happened in America. Of I think the way part, at least, there's a crucial aspect to understand about what happened. It was an effort to fight racism. And there was racism in the US, but you don't fight racism with a new form of racism. And that's when you get these quotas and these diversity, and then what counts is you're from a country that doesn't, a lot of people haven't come from. So that's all looking at people in a collectivized racial way, or a national and racial way, that perpetuates the same evil that they thought they were combating. And I think some genuinely thought this is a way to fight racism. And that's the tragic aspect of it. And the perverse aspect is, I think some understood that, like, if you've got these kind of national quotas, and in effect, so the immigration law was skewed towards, we want people, and it wasn't even Europe, it was Northern Europe. We don't even really want Southern Europeans. And so there was a real racist, sort of nationalist, collectivist, racial aspect to it. And in doing away with that, what you needed was just freedom. That people from around the world are free. You don't have to be from Northern Europe to come to America. But the idea that, no, we're not going to have freedom. We're going to have quotas, and we're going to say, no, we really don't want. And in effect, it was like, we really don't want Northern Europeans. We want people from who haven't, who are, in quotes, not represented here. That's all a collectivized, nationalistic, racist way of looking at it, and that's what was implemented. And in part because the previous immigration laws were bad, but this wasn't a solution to eliminating what was bad and what was evil about the other law. And even the family reunification, I think, has an aspect of this. From what I've read, you know more about this, that the the Chinese in particular, I mean, leave aside the Chinese Exclusionary Act and so on, but it was hard for Chinese in particular to bring a spouse or a children over. Like, they were more open. Yeah, if they're from Northern Europe, okay, the spouse and children can come, but Chinese, that. And so the some emphasis on, no, family reunification is going to be possible for everybody. There was an element of that they thought of it, I think, as this combats the previous racism. But again, if it becomes then the whole focus that our policy is about family reunification and not about people who want to work, so it's eclipsing that. That again it's both tragic and perverse, because I think some people know that, like, this is not legitimate, and it's a collectivist perspective that family matters. But that's how I think of what happened in terms of. I mean, these are laws that come in the '60s.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Chinese Exclusion Act, and the way I think about it and what's going on right now, and tell me if you agree with this, Onkar, is so the Chinese Exclusion Act, what it did essentially was ban immigration from China. And if you were Chinese, you couldn't come here unless you fit into one of these very narrow categories that the law said, okay, it's okay for you to come here if you are a teacher, for instance, if you're a minister, and like a very narrow set of occupations, right? What happens now? It's exactly like, I think it's the Chinese, our system today is like the Chinese Exclusion Act, but uh, applied to everyone else, to everyone equally. It's like discriminating everyone equally, because what is our system today? You can't come here unless you fit into these very, very narrow categories that are going to be if you're a family member of an American or a permanent resident. If you're lucky, if you have some skills that the government thinks that are useful for America, if you're lucky, because it's really hard to get a work visa, you may be able to come, but everyone else is completely excluded. And not to mention, if you are from one of these countries that have a lot of people already, that have sent a lot of people here, like India or China or Mexico, you can wait for 90 years or 120. Like the wait for some countries is over 100 years, and you will never be able to come. So that's sort of like the way I think about it. It's not a solution what this new law in 1965 that tried to fix this discrimination. I think it just did not fix that problem at all.
Yeah, yeah, it's certainly exclusionary overall. But as you said at the end, there's a way in which it's exclusionary of Chinese and Indian in a different ways, not so much racial as national. That you're from the wrong country. We have enough people from this country, so you're either can't get in or it will take you 150 years if how long the queue takes. So you'll be dead before we say, yeah, oh, you can come in. And that, so yeah, there's a way in which it excludes Chinese in the way that we used to more overtly for racial. But if you have national quotas, it amounts to the same thing. And it's not. It's this is what's tragic about it. That there were some people, I think, who genuinely wanted to fight the discriminatory, racist earlier immigration policy, but what they instituted was not a solution.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then I want to move on to another set of arguments that are usually given in favor of immigration. I've seen a lot of these, a lot more of these lately. There are like a lot of books that have recently come out and that are coming out soon about this topic, which is kind of like this sort of economic arguments, broadly speaking, to favor immigration. So this, for instance, this argument that immigration is good for the economy, so immigrants contribute to the economy. So kind of like the thing, immigrants raise GDP, and they start all this, like everyone is better off economically because of immigrants. And one example is, for instance, the website, the Alexandria Ocasio Cortez's website, reads in her page about her proposals and her stance on immigration. It reads, and I quote, "For too long, undocumented immigrants have been villainized despite the integral role they play in our communities and our economy. The IRS estimates that undocumented people pay over 9 billion in taxes annually. It is beyond time for a path to citizenship for all undocumented people in our country." So what I see AOC doing here is like, it is undocumented. So she advocates for not immigrants in general, for undocumented immigrants. And she says, look, they have been always so vital for our economy. Look, they pay a lot of money in taxes. It is past time that we let them, be citizens. So the implication is if immigrants did not contribute enough, what enough is obviously unclear, like we shouldn't welcome them. So that is one of the flaws I see with this sort of thinking about immigration. Oh, they're good for the economy. What do you think, Onkar?
Yeah, and you can see in what you quoted from AOC, both aspects at work. So that it's undocumented immigrants, and you said like that's what the focus is. That's an altruistic kind of focus. These are the people at I mean, supposedly the people at the bottom, um, and our whole and they're poor. That so our whole focus should be on them. So it's not on immigrants as such. It's these undocumented bottom, how they're thought about, whether that's true or not, but they're at the bottom, and so they get our moral concern. But then, and this is how collectivist arguments, or people who are collectivists, their arguments work. There's an altruistic aspect, but besides, it's in your collective self-interest or something. So it's look how much they contribute. So you're better off, and they pay 9 billion in taxes. So like, well, how can you be against them? You're better off with them, and that the that kind of um, economic justification is inherently collectivist. But what and the giveaway is there's always this national focus. It's oh, look what they contribute to the economy. It's not that, which is true. So I had said before that when thinking about immigration and that America was built by immigrants, they didn't come to build a nation in the sense of, oh, I get to contribute to the economy and grow the economy. No, I get to build my life, and the result of that is the the if you look at a national level, there's incredible prosperity and then incredible strength, and the U.S. can have the greatest military in the world. So, but that's all. Like, people didn't come here. I want to build a great military for America or something. So, but if that's your main focus, look what they do for the nation. Look at the taxes they pay to the government, and what that's a collectivist perspective versus what's true of undocumented immigrants. Most of them are working, and what that means is there's American citizens who want to hire them. And that's all the justification you need. That means the American citizen views it as I'm benefiting, I'm hiring someone in my fast food restaurant or on my farm, I'm benefiting. And the undocumented immigrant thinks, yeah, I want to work there, or I'll work on the farm. He's benefiting. What other justification do you need? You don't need to say, oh, but look at how, like, I'm suspicious of that, but the nation's prospering. So so it must be okay. Like that perspective is a collectivist perspective, and it's not the way to look at immigrants and the way to look at freedom or productivity. You don't look at it in collectivist terms.
I think that's very related to another argument that has been pushed a lot lately, which is the argument that we need immigrants to sustain the welfare state because America has an aging population and we're running out of young people that can work and sustain the welfare state. And there was this headline for this article in Time magazine recently that reads, Aging Americans face bleak futures unless we let new immigrants help. And so this thought of immigrants, oh, we have to welcome them because they have to sustain this welfare state that otherwise it's going to collapse, is the idea that kind of like trying to instill kind of like, we kind of like see it a little bit as this fear that, oh, if we don't welcome these young people, these immigrants, you are not, you old person, like you're going to have to work until you're 90 because you're not going to be able to receive your social security at an earlier age. Um, so what do you think of that particular one?
Yeah, there's definitely a fear element to it, and we can talk more about that. But it's also part of the whole dynamic here. So if you think of the anti-immigration side is uses welfare, and it's, oh, immigrants are just flocking to America and they're going to go on welfare of various forms, and they're going to bankrupt us. And the reply is, or a reply from the people who think of themselves as pro-immigration in some sense is, oh no, they're not going to bankrupt it. We're going to have a bankrupt welfare system if we don't allow in immigrants who, I mean, immigrants tend to be on average younger than the native population. And so you put it like the Time magazine headline was aging Americans. Yeah, so the native born, the citizens, they're older, they're going to be collecting Social Security, Medicare. You need people still paying into the system. So we need immigrants because the birth rate isn't that high in America now. But again, that's a collectivistic perspective. And the idea that the welfare state, in one way or another, should be what drives immigration, that it's if you thought they took a little bit more welfare than the average citizen, oh, we're going to be against immigration, and they take a little less, oh, let's bring them in because we have to prop up the welfare state. That is, again, it doesn't look at people as individuals and is trying to build their own lives, which is what the perspective should be. I've read some economic analyses that make me think it's doubtful this is even true. It might be sort of marginally true that immigrants can help save Medicare and social, or help save our welfare state, which is precarious because the whole thing is a sort of Ponzi scheme. But that you would make this is an argument that is pro-immigration. It's not pro-immigrant if you're looking at it as an immigrant, as an individual, not as and an individual that it's his own life and he wants to make something of his own life. Not, oh yeah, we need you. It's sort of like a beast of burden. We need you to pay for our welfare because in our retirement we still want to be able to go to the doctor and so on. So we need you. Like, is that really your attitude towards people, that you view them as they're a sort of a means to your end and they're a kind of servant? And whatever you would call that, that's not pro-immigrant.
And another similar perspective that I think views immigrants as like, oh, they're here to serve you, to work for you, in the sense of like to maybe sacrifice for you, is this perspective that, for instance, George W. Bush has said repeatedly, and it's very, very, I'm sure our audience has heard it many times, that immigrants do the jobs that Americans won't do. And so I remember once I was watching a clip on YouTube of a celebrity or something at one of these talk shows, and they were talking about Trump, and this celebrity was opposed to Trump. And they were talking about immigration, and this celebrity said, well, if we don't have immigration, who's going to clean your bathroom, Donald Trump? And then obviously it didn't go well with the panelists and everything, because they thought it was discriminatory and all of that. But and this celebrity apologized. But I think that is a lot of the way that a lot of people that are trying to advocate for immigration think about immigrants. Oh, they are gonna do these jobs that we Americans don't want to do, and kind of like this, they're gonna serve us. They're gonna serve this country by doing this sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm glad in the talk show there was some pushback against it. I don't know if it was the greatest pushback, but yeah, it is an attitude towards, yeah, they're like second class citizens, but we need somebody to do the dirty work. And again, like, if one, how can you think of that as your pro-immigrant, pro-immigration? I mean, it's not true either. And this is part I brought up before, that um, the that high tech companies and in a lot of industries, they're saying, like, we need people to do jobs that Americans can't do. It's not that they don't want to do them; they can't do it, and in part because our education system, particularly primary and secondary education, is bad in the U.S. We have many leading universities. We don't have anywhere close to the best primary and secondary education. And the result is that, yeah, there, you can think of it in a sense as a shortage of highly educated workers. So it's not true in regard to immigration, and that someone would use it as a kind of argument. Oh, well, yeah, you might have some reason to be about against immigrants and immigration, but they're going to do the dirty job, so let them in. That is, again, it's a condescending, at best, a condescending, and in some ways, I think it's often has a racial aspect to it, of a disdain for immigrants. And like, why would you use that as an argument in terms of, if you really think of immigration as in an American way, as it's a positive and it's about people seeking freedom?
And I think these sort of arguments, kind of like more economical arguments, is kind of like an alternative. So the arguments for family reunification and asylum is, well, we need to kind of like provide for these immigrants, and do this charity to these immigrants. But I think these economic arguments are trying to persuade people who may think like, oh, okay, but what's in there for me? And like, what do I gain from immigration? Those are the kind of like the sort of people that I think these arguments are trying to address. So it's like, it's allegedly in their self, in everyone's, in the societies or America's, so to speak, self-interest to welcome immigration. What do you think of kind of like that perspective of, oh, it benefits all of us, or it's our self-interest to have more immigration?
Yeah, that's, again, it's a collectivized perspective. So a proper conception of self-interest, and what, when one thinks about America as a place where one can pursue one's self-interest, that it's part of what the Declaration is about, and it's part of what the Statue of Liberty promises, that you come here yearning to breathe free, and you can pursue your own interests, or the Declaration of Independence's way of putting it, you can pursue your own happiness. That's not a collectivized perspective. It's your own happiness, your own interest. You can build your own life. It's not, you're going to build up the nation, the economy, um, and a different way to look at it is the to say that altruism has had a monopoly or near monopoly on ethics. Part of what it's taught people is there's two forms of relationships among people. One is you sacrifice for them, so they're exploiting you, or you exploit them. And the aspects of the immigration that, oh, it's, we're going to have refugees, asylum, that kind of thing. It's, yeah, we're taking care of them, we're sacrificing for them, but that's what they mean by compassion. It's our moral duty to do that. And the flip side then of thinking about it as, well, but shouldn't it be in our self-interest, that gets processed as, you know, shouldn't we be exploiting them? And this is the, like, they do jobs that Americans won't do. Who's going to clean your toilet? It's like we're exploiting them. Or they pay taxes. Pay taxes means you give up what you've produced and someone else is going to use it and spend it. That's a form of exploitation. And so when you really activate, look how many taxes they pay. So it's in your self-interest to have them here. It means they're paying for your Medicare, or they're paying for your Social Security, and that's a form of exploitation. And so the on both sides, and they can only think of it like this because of their conception of what altruism does. It's altruism says, don't exploit others, let others exploit you. Like, those are your two choices. And the arguments, so part of what is wrong, and like deeply wrong philosophically, about the so-called pro-immigration arguments, as we've talked about, for some of them, the idea that you could even think of this as pro-immigrant, if your attitude towards them is they're going to clean your toilets, like that's really your pro. You're not pro-immigrant if that's your view. but they're all tainted by altruism and collectivism in thinking about that the relationship between human beings is inherently exploitative, and it's not. And so the the basic positive perspective is, if people want to come here and produce and trade, yeah, you're welcome. That's what it means to yearn to breathe free. You're going to build your life by producing and trading with other people. And that, any form of trade, when it's voluntary, when it's real trade, both parties benefit. Like, you trade because that is like, so you hire an immigrant, you run a fast food restaurant because it's beneficial to do that, and he works there because it's beneficial for him, and there's no exploitation in that. And that, but that's a perspective, an individualist American perspective, not a collectivized altruistic perspective.
Yes, and there is this right of people to move and to come here to work and to engage in work if someone wants to hire them. But the way, and there's also the rights of Americans, right, to associate with whoever they want. But the way that these sort of arguments treat the alleged interest of the Americans in immigration is, they're going to come to serve you. They're gonna, like you said, they're gonna come to work for you, but in the sense of like, they're gonna come to make your life better, to serve you, and to make and they're here literally to work to make this country better. But in reality, the focus of the issue of the rights of Americans is, Americans have the right to associate, to hire, to trade with whoever they want, whether they were born here in America or they were born elsewhere. So that is, I think, what's in the self-interest of the Americans, being able to freely choose who they want to hire, who they want to sell things to, rent their apartments to, who they want to marry, because uh, people are allowed to marry immigrants, but uh, part of the thing is, you have to ask the government for permission to have your immigrant spouse live with you in America. So that freedom of being able to associate in whatever way you want with whoever you want, I think is I think part of the true self-interest of Americans in the issue of immigration.
Yeah, and there was some recognition of that, not in an abstract, principled way, but even the family reunification. Part of the impetus for it was Americans in the world wars, and I think particularly World War II. They're overseas, they meet and marry people, and then they come back to the US, and to have their spouse come with them was very difficult. And so part of the family reunification was, really, we're going to treat our soldiers like this. Now, you fought in a world war, and you come home, and we're going to tell you that, oh, you but the person you met and there's your spouse now, they can't come. There was something perverse and anti-freedom about that, and there was something perverse and anti-freedom about this. And the idea of putting it in terms of freedom and the freedom and rights of Americans, the idea that other Americans have some kind of power to tell a soldier when he's come home, oh, but you need our permission for the person you've met and fallen in love with in another country. You need our permission whether that person can come here or not. That's crazy to think that. And so something like the family reunification, as we were talking about, there was some good motivation behind some of these things. And for the family reunification, this was one of them. But they're wrong. And there were some bad motivations as well. And they're wrong in essence as policies and laws. But so part of, as I put it, that it's part tragedy and part perversity here. But we really need major reform to the immigration laws and system.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the way to make that happen is for immigration advocates to have more individualistic arguments in favor of immigration, and to see immigrants as individuals and not these this collective, because I think a lot of these arguments in favor of immigration are a reaction to what the anti-immigrant kind of like side claims. So a lot of what I see is the anti-immigrant side, call it Republicans, some conservatives here in America, are the ones that kind of like set the agenda on immigration, and then the advocates of immigration kind of like react to that. So they're going to claim, oh, immigrants are criminals, and the reaction is, well, actually no, here's this study that proves that immigrants commit less crimes than Americans. And then, well, they take more welfare than Americans, well, actually no. So it's like this back and forth. It's like always a reaction to the anti-immigrant sort of rhetoric and arguments. And that's part of what I see in the debate, and how these arguments go back and forth.
Yeah, and part of when you're reacting in that kind of way, you're almost always accepting the basic framework, assumptions, and basic premises that are sort of setting up the alleged problem. So if it's I mean, take the economic thing that, oh, they take away American jobs, and the instead of challenging the idea, there's an American job, it's owned by some collective of Americans, and it's been taken away by some non-American. Instead of challenging that, it's, oh no, they're not taking away jobs, they're doing jobs that Americans don't want to do. And then if people that you've accepted this whole collectivized view, it's, well, but how is a software engineer from India doing a job that other Americans don't want to do? So obviously we can't let him in, and so they think they're defending immigration, but you've accepted the wrong anti-American perspective on immigration, and you can't defend it. Certainly, you can't defend it in any proper pro-American way if you've accepted those premises. So to say it's reactive is, you're responding to the concrete accusation without thinking about the broader principles and context, which means you're accepting the principles and context of your opponent. And a lot of debates work like this. And the proper solution, this is a part of, Ayn Rand would always say, check your premises. It's that if you've got the wrong basic premises and assumptions, you're always going to be led astray. You're always going to get the wrong answer. And in debates, it's easy because you want to respond and you want to say, no, I don't agree with that. And if you respond in the concrete without thinking of the broader philosophical issues that are in play, you're just accepting the wrong philosophical issues and trying to answer, and there's no answer when you do that.
Do you think there's any validity in some of the reactions against immigration from kind of like the anti-immigrant, or the people that are very skeptical of immigration, based on how flawed, let's say, these efforts are to promote immigration on these grounds?
Yes, so some of the facts are important in a context. So take something like immigrant. So when an immigrant commits, particularly it's like a vicious, violent crime, those get not the major headlines. They kill somebody or rape somebody. Um, the facts are relevant to expose the motivations and reasoning or lack of reasoning of people making these accusations, but they're not, the answer is not, to the issue is not, well, immigrants commit fewer crimes, so it's okay to let them in. So it's that part of it is that kind of begrudging, yeah, okay, if they committed 0.1% more crime, then we couldn't have immigration. But it just turns out, if you're doing that, that's a mistake. If you're doing it to expose that it's just fear mongering, that they don't think if an American citizen commits a gruesome crime, they don't think, oh, well, I wonder if immigrants commit fewer or more. It's just, okay, well, I've got an immigrant who's committed a crime. I can use this to try to advance an anti-immigrant um, argument and stance and get people to vote in this way. So you're playing on people's emotions and fears and presenting the facts to help expose that they're playing on fears. That's legitimate, but it's not the answer to um, the immigration policy, and it should be based on statistics about crimes, and it shouldn't be. It should be based about freedom, and it's part of our whole way of thinking about immigration now, because of how much control government exerts, is that it has to be government controlled. And so there's a kind of question: should government allow in immigrants if they commit this amount of crimes? So, and that's a collectivized governmental perspective that's wrong. And immigration used to be much more private. It was private citizens making decisions about who they want to deal with. And in that context, yeah, like if I mean, take businesses hiring people. If they really thought, yeah, but these people of who I'm hiring, they're going to steal from the company. I mean, employees do that. They're going to do that more. And so, yeah, it's not in my interest to hire these 10 people or whatever. They wouldn't hire them. But it should be individual decisions. So it's not as though like crime is irrelevant and so on, but you wouldn't have a collectivized perspective on it. Guatemalans commit a lot of crime. It would be, do I have reason to think these particular people have a criminal bent to them? And if I thought that, it's, yeah, I wouldn't employ them. But that would be true of an immigrant or an American citizen. Like if I thought, yeah, I get bad vibes from this, and I wonder if this guy's going to steal from the government. Yeah, that would be count against him about thinking about employing him. But that's an individualized, private perspective versus a collectivized governmental perspective on it.
Another thing that often the Republicans, generally speaking, react to is this push for diversity from kind of like the left, the so-called left, or like the Democrats more generally, and they react to that very negatively. Do you think there is something to that reaction?
Yes. So, and part of putting it that many of these policies are part tragic and part perverse. There is an element, I think, that on the so-called pro-immigration side that is motivated by. So, an element doesn't mean it's all. I don't even think it's the majority are motivated by this, but an element motivated by. So take the you're bringing up the diversity of thinking of it as, yeah, we're going to help bring into the country people who don't have American values, don't share, and will never learn American values. It's a way of diluting America and what it stands for. I think for sure there's people who think of immigrants just it's a different perspective of having an anti-immigrant uh, orientation. So this of, well, yeah, they're sort of low, dirty people. They'll do the dirty jobs. You're not seeing them as people and as individuals. And if it's, oh, they're from I don't know, Madagascar, so like they're alien to American values. They'll never learn American values. So we want people from countries that have never come here before. So and we don't want Northern Europeans. There's an element of people, because there is a real anti-American element in intellectuals, in the so-called elites. That is real, and so there is a motivation of thinking of, yeah, immigration is a way to undermine America. I don't think it's true in the, I mean, but there's people motivated by that, and when they push diversity, that like what counts about the person is nothing significant about the person. It just so happens he's from a country that people haven't come here before, and they think of that as the sort of Yeah, and they wouldn't want to come here, but if we allow them in, that's part of how they sort of water down the American ideals and American values. And that people can see that part of the push for diversity is that, and that they think that that's something really bad. That's true. The solution isn't to become anti immigration. The solution is to be pro freedom in immigration and get rid of these quotas, and that the government has some kind of social engineering function here of to diversify the country. So that's the proper solution. But I can understand that they see the pro immigration side and they see aspects of it and think there's some bad motivation here. I think, yeah, that is real, and it is something that they're sensing. But their response to it, again, just as we've been talking, the pro immigration response is often wrong to what the anti-immigrant arguments. It's they just accept the same collectivized perspective. So similar here, that you can be right that there's some bad motivation, but your solution can be perverse. And the solution of like build a wall and don't allow immigrants in is a perverse response to that kind of motivation of, yeah, we want the immigrants who are anti-American in the country.
Yeah, and the whole build a wall and all this. This is so Republicans for some part of history didn't used to be against immigration. There's even like a debate between Reagan and Bush in from 1980 where they are both praising immigrants, and like even like they're talking about illegal immigrants, and they're both saying like, yeah, they're great people and they should be allowed to work and not live in the shadows. That would be I mean, right now it would be impossible to hear a Republican, I think, or almost impossible, saying something like that. So this shift, there's like this shift in attitude that Republicans have had in the later years, I suppose, where they are posing all these objections to immigration that then the pro-immigrant side kind of like reacts to in this way that we're discussing.
Yes, and part of that shift is you had brought up before motivation by fear, and some of these arguments on the pro-immigration side is, yeah, you it's sort of paraphrasing the argument is, yeah, you don't like immigrants that much, but you're not going to have a doctor, and then you're going to run out. Your social security is going to run out if you don't allow immigrants in the country. So you better allow them, even if you don't like them. There's an element of that fear. It's what's happened on the anti-immigration side is that fear has also been stoked. It's one of the what's perverse about Trump, but part of his appeal, which is that he plays on people's fears and really tries to build them up. And so, well, we're talking about the kind of argument from the anti-immigration side of finding some immigrant who's committed a crime and like holding the see, we told you this is what was going to happen. So without any concern about um, is this representative? What's your response when an American commits a crime? Or are you trying to control the American population or the American birth rate? If it turns out Americans commit more crimes than immigrants, is your response, oh yeah, we have to clamp down then on people having Americans having kids because they're going to grow up and they're going to be more criminals than if people immigrated to, like, they don't have. It's so obvious that that's not what they're doing. So they're driven by fear, and Trump has. I think if you're comparing Trump to Reagan, Reagan painted a positive portrait of America. Whether his presidency lived up to that, so that is he painted a positive and a positive future. And Trump, it paints it's we're in the darkest place, and if we allow in more immigrants, it's going to push us off the cliff. Sort of like that's the atmosphere of it, and that's it. It's the his portrait of America is not true, and so this idea that if like we're in this kind of emergency situation, and if you don't do something, you're going to be dead. That it's false and it's perverse to play to that in the American electorate. But there's, I mean, just as on the pro immigration side, it works in some ways. Not, I think it's not the majority of Americans who respond to this, but the same on the anti-immigration side. There are people who respond. I mean, it's why Trump can have a success and have a base, that they respond, that they are motivated and driven by fear, and it's not a healthy motivation if that's your primary, that you're motivated by fear.
And it's also not just, oh, America is this dark place and these immigrants are going to come and push us over the edge. It's also the painting of immigrants as these absolute monsters. And they literally, he has compared them to Hannibal Lecter several times. And, these ridiculous claims like Latin America is emptying its asylums into the United States, that sort of thing, like really trying to portray immigrants as the lowest of the low that are coming here to literally eat you alive.
And
Um,
the that's an aspect of the individualism versus collectivism and the importance of retaining the individualist perspective. My view of most Americans, and when I talk to them at an individual personal level, they're not anti immigrant because their individual personal experience is immigrants are people. And a lot of them are good. It's not like every immigrant a person's met is good, just like not every American you've met is good. But a lot of them are good and some aren't. And you have the same individual perspective of just like American citizens, I'm going to try to deal with the good ones and avoid the ones who I think aren't good. Same with immigrants, but they don't have an experience because it's not true. They don't have experience. Yeah, well, every immigrant I met has been an SOB. Like that's not. But
yeah.
then they can get to a national level in politics and so on, and things are presented in collectivist terms and they can't break out of them. And part of it is it's the job of intellectuals and philosophers to help them break out, to say like this argument is wrong from its inception because it's coming from a collectivized perspective. You can't have this collectivized um, evaluations and assessments like all immigrants are good or all are bad, all are Hannibal Lecter or all are angels. Neither is true. And it couldn't be true because you're dealing with individuals who have choice. And again, like Americans, I still think, even in a political climate that's pretty against immigration, at an individual level, most Americans aren't anti-immigrant. But and this is part of why I really resent a Trump. He stokes the fears, whereas what should be, if we had good politicians, and as we've been talking about, it's not like Trump is bad, but the people, the Democrats and the so-called progressive, they're good on immigrant. They're also collectivists on it. What we needed are some politicians who are much more American and individualistic, and to say, no, this is not the way to think about Americans or immigrants. You can't think in these collectivized terms about it. And if they appeal to America, like think of your actual individual interactions with immigrants. Are they? Does it match at all what Trump says that they're all coming from insane asylums and prisons and like is that? And if we had better leadership, you could activate the better side of Americans on immigration. And what's tragic about our political situation now is nobody's doing it.
Yeah, I agree with that, Onkar. And well, that is all for the episode today. And I want to share some resources with the audience that they may want to look at to learn more about what we discussed today. Is two podcast episodes that Onkar and I did recently. One is on the question about immigration on a welfare state, and on an episode on called A Legal Crisis on Immigration, where we touched a lot on the dynamics of the debate over immigration. You can find those at our YouTube channel. So, and as usual, if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have questions or comments about today's episode, or you have suggestions for future episodes, please send us an email at newideal@aynran.org. So thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Onkar.
Thanks.